The Senate hearing room fell into a heavy silence as former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi stepped confidently toward the witness table. For most of the morning, her confirmation hearing to lead a major federal regulatory agency had unfolded smoothly, with predictable questions and polite exchanges. But everything shifted the moment Representative Jasmine Crockett opened her leather portfolio. What had seemed like routine questioning instantly took a sharp turn when Crockett calmly mentioned a previously unknown $500 million fund tied to decisions Bondi had made years earlier. The gallery erupted in whispers. Senators stopped writing mid-sentence. Bondi's carefully maintained confidence slipped without warning. No one in the chamber was prepared for what unfolded next. As Crockett laid out one document after another with deliberate precision, Bondi's once steady composure dissolved. Her voice shook, her answers faltered, and she struggled to defend actions she had never expected to face under public scrutiny. The nomination that had appeared inevitable that same morning suddenly hovered on the edge of collapse. Within hours, clips from the exchange would spread across every major platform, viewed millions of times. Commentators would call it the most dramatic confirmation hearing of the decade. Viewers who followed political accountability moments were urged to like and subscribe for more coverage of intense, well-prepared questioning that forces transparency from powerful officials. Earlier that day, the Senate Commerce Committee hearing room inside the Hart Building had been prepared long before dawn. Staff arranged microphones, checked cameras, and distributed packets of background materials. Reporters filled the press seats, trading predictions about an easy, uncontroversial approval process. Bondi arrived nearly 40 minutes early with a team of advisors and attorneys. At 58, she had built a long career as a polished and media-savvy public figure. Her resume stretched from state prosecutor to 2 terms as Florida Attorney General, followed by roles with high-profile law firms and political organizations. Wearing a tailored Navy suit and a small American flag pin, she projected the practiced authority she had refined over decades. "She's practically guaranteed confirmation," one experienced regulatory reporter murmured to another. Bipartisan support, years of experience, she's handled tougher hearings without breaking a sweat. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett prepared in an entirely different way. The third-term Congresswoman from Texas was known for her thorough research and sharp, strategic questioning. Her background as a civil rights attorney taught her to dismantle complicated issues with accuracy instead of theatrics. Her materials were arranged with color-coded tabs, carefully marked timelines, and detailed citations. Placed in precise order, this hearing was unlike others because of what had happened 3 weeks earlier. A whistleblower from a large industrial corporation had delivered documents to Crockett's office. Those records appeared to show that during Bondi's time as Attorney General, nearly $500 million in settlement funds from consumer protection cases had been redirected into a network of foundations and investment structures tied to high-level political figures. Crockett's staff spent days in secure rooms verifying sources, matching signatures, and assembling a clear timeline. Marcus Washington, her legislative director, led a small team of financial forensics specialists who reviewed every transaction to ensure their evidence could withstand legal challenges. Remember, Washington reminded her just hours before the hearing. She expects the usual questions about her experience and policy philosophy. She doesn't know what we found. The goal is to build the public record piece by piece before she realizes what's coming. The implications stretched far beyond one confirmation vote. If the documents were authentic, they suggested a pattern of personal gain that directly contradicted the consumer protection responsibilities Bondi once held. Even more troubling, several financial connections linked to the documents overlapped with industries overseen by the very regulatory commission she hoped to lead. Those conflicts had never been disclosed to the public or to Congress. At exactly 10 a.m., Chairman Reynolds gavelled the hearing to order. Opening statements proceeded predictably. Republican senators praised Bondi's public service record. Democratic senators voiced general policy concerns without hinting at the explosive information waiting to surface. Bondi delivered her own statement with polished confidence. "I am honored to be considered for this responsibility," she began. Throughout my career, I have worked to protect consumers and promote transparency. If confirmed, I will continue that commitment and work across party lines to uphold the public interest. The first round of questions felt routine. Friendly Republican inquiries allowed Bondi to highlight her achievements, while Democrats focused on general policy issues. She responded smoothly, demonstrating the practiced ease of a seasoned public official. But when Crockett's name was called, the room shifted. Those who followed congressional hearings knew the signs: her calm posture, her organized folders, her steady focus. Bondi sensed it too. Her posture stiffened as she straightened in her chair. Just 36 hours earlier, Crockett's office had received additional financial records that completed the final connections. These documents outlined the flow of funds across state and international jurisdictions, before linking back to investment accounts that had allegedly benefited Bondi through carefully obscured channels. Everything was in place for a confrontation unlike anything the committee had seen in years. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her tone calm and deliberate. "Miss Bondi, I'd like to focus on your handling of consumer protection settlement funds during your time as Florida's Attorney General, particularly how those funds were distributed." Bondi gave a small nod, her face composed. "Of course, Representative. Consumer protection was a central part of my work in Florida. Between 2011 and 2018, the state received roughly $1.88 billion from multi-state consumer protection settlements. Is that consistent with your memory?" Crockett asked. Bondi offered a smooth answer. "That sounds generally accurate, though without the exact files in front of me, I cannot confirm the precise figure." "I understand," Crockett replied. "In your confirmation questionnaire, you stated that every settlement dollar was distributed according to statutory requirements and approved by the courts. Is that still your testimony today?" "Yes," Bondi said confidently. "Every allocation followed the law, with judicial oversight whenever required." Crockett nodded, then opened a folder and lifted a document for the committee to see. "I'd like to enter into the record several documents concerning the creation of the Florida Consumer Protection Fund in 2012, an initiative you personally authorized. According to this founding charter, the fund was designed to benefit Florida consumers harmed by deceptive or unfair practices. Is that correct?" "That is correct," Bondi answered. "The fund ensured settlement money was used properly for consumer benefit." "Thank you," Crockett continued. "Now I'd like to discuss a transfer dated March 17, 2013, involving $42 million moved from the Consumer Protection Fund to the Enterprise Florida Economic Development Corporation. Can you explain how this transfer served a consumer protection purpose?" Bondi's expression shifted for the first time. Enterprise Florida played a role in statewide economic development. A strong economy benefits consumers by creating jobs and opportunities. "I see," Crockett said. "Was the legislature informed that money specifically designated for consumer restitution was being redirected toward economic development programs?" Bondi interrupted quickly. "Representative, that is a misunderstanding of the nature of these funds. Not all settlement amounts were restricted to direct restitution. Some allowed for broader consumer benefit initiatives, and economic development can fall under that category." "I appreciate the clarification," Crockett replied. "However, the National Mortgage Services settlement from January 2013 clearly states that this $42 million was to be used exclusively for direct restitution and consumer remediation programs. Yet 6 weeks later, the same amount was transferred to Enterprise Florida. How do these documents align?" A quiet tension filled the room as committee members examined the papers being passed down the dais. Several senators leaned in, their interest sharp. Bondi interrupted again, this time more firmly. "Settlement administration involves complex legal judgments. Any transfer would have gone through several layers of legal review. Without access to the full analysis from that period, I cannot speak to the reasoning behind a specific decision. But I am confident it was within legal boundaries." "That's noteworthy," Crockett said evenly. "Because I also have a memo from your office's legal counsel dated February 28, 2013. warning that this transfer would likely violate the settlement's terms and could expose the state to legal liability. Did you receive this memo? Bondi hesitated, her composure slipping. I don't recall that specific memo. My office handled thousands of documents. I relied on senior staff to bring urgent matters to my attention. I understand the volume, Crockett said. However, this memo contains your handwritten initials at the bottom, next to a note reading, "Proceed anyway. Alternative funding pathway confirmed." Could you explain what alternative funding pathway meant in this situation? The atmosphere tightened. Cameras clicked rapidly as photographers captured Bondi's increasingly strained expression. Her next interruption came with a defensive edge. Representative, without reviewing this alleged document in full context and comparing it to my official files, I cannot comment on a handwritten note I may or may not have written nearly 10 years ago. I respect your need for context, Crockett said. Let me provide some additional clarity. She lifted another document. This is an email dated March 18, 2031, day after the $42 million transfer from James Wakefield, then CEO of Enterprise Florida, sent to your private email account. It reads, "Transfer received. Allocation proceeding as discussed. Waterbridge Holdings will receive initial capitalization tomorrow. Were you familiar with an entity named Waterbridge Holdings?" Bondi's next interruption came instantly. Representative, I will not comment on selective emails presented without full context. Enterprise Florida worked with many partners. I cannot remember every organization they interacted with. That makes sense, Crockett said. Corporate structures can be complicated. Allow me to be more specific. She clicked a remote and a chart illuminated the screen behind her. This diagram shows the corporate structure of Waterbridge Holdings as registered in Delaware. As you can see, Waterbridge was owned by Sunshine State Partners, LLC, which was owned by Atlantic Investment Group, according to state corporate records. You became a special advisor to Atlantic Investment Group in January 2019 immediately, after leaving office with an annual compensation package of $2.4 million. Did your past decisions, directing settlement funds, end up benefiting a company you later worked for? Crockett asked. The question landed like a shockwave. The room fell silent. A senator leaned toward a staffer and whispered something urgent. Bondi turned to her attorney, her expression growing increasingly strained. Her fifth interruption cut sharply through the quiet. Representative, you're stitching together an overblown conspiracy by linking unrelated events across many years. My employment after leaving government had absolutely no connection to decisions made during my time as Attorney General. This line of questioning is inappropriate and bordering on defamatory. Crockett's tone never wavered. I'm simply asking factual questions based on documents in the record. Did you disclose your later relationship with Atlantic Investment Group to the Ethics Commission or in your nomination paperwork before this committee? Bondi's sixth interruption came with clear anger. All of my post-government employment relationships were disclosed exactly as required by law. The suggestion that my official actions somehow benefited future positions is unfounded and frankly offensive. I'm not making suggestions, Crockett replied calmly. I'm laying out a timeline supported by documented evidence. She flipped to a new section in her binder. I have here bank records showing that between 2013 and 2018, a total of $498.70 million from consumer protection settlements was channeled through similar alternative funding pathways to organizations that later showed financial ties to you or your close associates. This pattern repeats across at least 14 separate settlements. She raised her eyes to meet Bondi's directly. My question is straightforward. Did you disclose, as required under federal law, your financial relationships with entities that benefited from your official decisions as Florida's Attorney General? The room held its breath. Bondi stared at Crockett, her jaw tightening. For the first time in her long public life, she looked genuinely unsettled, trapped in a contradiction she could not easily dismiss. The chairman finally broke the silence. Miss Bondi, please respond to the representative's question. Bondi straightened, clearing her throat. Mr. Chairman, the representative's characterizations are deeply misleading. There were no improper connections requiring disclosure. These corporate relationships are being framed in a way that creates a false perception of misconduct where none exists. That was when Jasmine Crockett delivered the line that would echo throughout political commentary for months. Ms. Bondi, she said, her tone steady and clear, the documents aren't creating an impression. They're exposing one. What they show is that nearly $500 million intended to help harmed consumers was rerouted into entities that later enriched you personally. That's not an interpretation. It's a documented fact. Her words froze the chamber. For several long seconds, no one moved. Bondi's face, usually a picture of unshakable confidence, turned noticeably pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her water glass. When she set it down, the liquid spilled across her prepared notes. Bondi began, but her voice cracked. She stopped, cleared her throat, and tried again. The financial relationships you are referring to are grossly mischaracterized. There were appropriate safeguards and legal reviews? Her voice faltered as she glanced desperately toward her legal team. One attorney leaned in, whispering urgently. But the damage was already visible to every person in the room. Chairman Reynolds leaned forward. Ms. Bondi, would you like a short recess? Bondi nodded, her composure slipping. Yes. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would appreciate a few minutes to review these documents, which I am seeing for the first time today. We will take a 15-minute recess, the chairman announced. Striking the gavel dot as the chamber stirred, the press gallery exploded with activity. Reporters scrambled for the exits, phones pressed to their ears, racing to break the story. Inside the room, Bondi huddled with her attorneys, their faces grim as they rushed through the documents now entered into the record. Across the aisle, Crockett calmly reorganized her binder, receiving quiet nods of respect from colleagues on both sides, many of whom disagreed with her politically, yet recognized the power of her fact-driven approach. When the hearing resumed 20 minutes later, after Bondi's legal team requested additional time, the energy of the room had shifted dramatically. Bondi returned to the witness table visibly shaken, her earlier confidence replaced by the cautious posture of someone acutely aware of the stakes. Ms. Bondi, the chairman said, would you like to offer further response to Representative Crockett's questions? Bondi leaned into the microphone, her voice controlled but thin. Mr. Chairman, after reviewing some of the documents presented today, I believe there may indeed be legitimate questions regarding certain financial transactions and relationships that warrant further clarification. Although I maintain that my actions have always been ethical and within the law, I acknowledge that a further review of these matters is appropriate before the committee continues with my nomination. She hesitated briefly, then resumed speaking with what sounded like a prepared statement. To ensure the committee has complete trust in my nomination, I am requesting that my confirmation hearing be paused until a full examination of these issues is completed. I remain confident that a careful review will clear up any concerns, but I also understand the seriousness of the questions raised today. Her announcement triggered another wave of murmurs throughout the gallery. Members of the committee exchanged startled looks. It was extremely unusual for a nominee to voluntarily halt their own confirmation process, and it essentially signaled that the allegations carried enough weight to warrant investigation. Chairman Reynolds gave a slow, deliberate nod. Given the importance of the matters presented and your request for more time, this committee will suspend the proceedings. We will resume once we have reviewed the documentation submitted by Representative Crockett and any additional materials connected to these issues. As the chairman formally closed the hearing, the significance of what had just happened began to sink in across the room. What had started as a routine confirmation hearing had quickly evolved into a potential legal and ethical inquiry with consequences that could reach far beyond the Senate chamber within minutes. Clips from the exchange appeared online. Within an hour, the confrontation was running on every major news network. By that evening, the video of Crockett's pointed statement, "You redirected $500 million," intended for harmed consumers into organizations that later benefited you personally. That is not an interpretation. It is a documented fact had been viewed more than 15 million times, paired with images of Bondi's emotional reaction. What made the moment especially striking was not only the documents or the questions asked, but the complete shift in power that took place. Bondi, who had entered the hearing confident and polished, ended it looking shaken and defensive, struggling to justify actions that seemed impossible to defend once the evidence was laid out. As coverage grew across television and online platforms, legal analysts highlighted the possible consequences extending well beyond a stalled nomination. This goes far beyond simple confirmation politics, former federal prosecutor Barbara McQuaid told CNN. The coordinated diversion of consumer protection funds for personal benefit could spark criminal inquiries in several jurisdictions. Even conservative commentators acknowledge the seriousness. Context is always important. Former Justice Department official George Terwilliger said on Fox News, but the documentation shown today raises questions that cannot be brushed aside as partisan attacks. These are significant issues that require a full investigation. The confrontation achieved something rare in today's political climate. It shifted the discussion away from party arguments and focused instead on a core question about public responsibility. Can officials trusted to defend consumers use their authority to enrich themselves? The exchange between Representative Crockett and Pam Bondi grew far beyond a single moment in a hearing room, turning into a nationwide debate about how billions of dollars in consumer protection settlements are handled and monitored each year. Outside the Hart Senate office building, crowds of demonstrators gathered spontaneously as news spread, holding signs with messages such as, "Return the $500 million and consumer funds belong to victims, not politicians." News helicopters circled above, capturing the rapidly growing protest, an unmistakable sign that the hearing had touched a nerve with people worried about the misuse of funds intended for victims of corporate wrongdoing. Inside the Capitol, the political fallout was immediate and cut across party lines. Senate leaders from both parties held emergency meetings to decide how to respond. While early statements followed predictable partisan patterns, the extensive documentation created an unusually difficult situation for those defending Bondi. Senator Marco Rubio, who had originally introduced and supported Bondi's nomination, released a carefully phrased statement. The allegations raised today are serious and deserve full investigation. While Pam Bondi has a record of service in Florida, the integrity of our consumer protection system must remain unquestionable. I support a complete review before any further action is taken on her nomination. The White House, which had put forward Bondi's name, faced intense pressure, and the press secretary addressed the issue during the afternoon briefing. The president supports due process and a proper review of all allegations. We take the concerns raised today seriously, and will examine the documents presented to the committee. Ms. Bondi should have the opportunity to respond fully to these matters. By that evening, several state attorneys general announced reviews of their own consumer settlement distributions, concerned that similar off-the-record funding routes might exist in their states. The National Association of Attorneys General revealed the creation of a special task force focused on settlement fund transparency, acknowledging that the current system lacks strong oversight and protective measures. The legal consequences for Bondi developed quickly. By the next morning, the Florida bar had opened an ethics investigation. The state's current attorney general announced a full audit of all settlement distributions made during Bondi's administration. Most notably, the U.S. Department of Justice confirmed that its Public Integrity Section had begun a preliminary review to determine whether federal laws had been violated. 3 days after the hearing, Bondi issued a formal statement withdrawing her name from consideration for the regulatory post. The announcement, written with extreme precision, pointed to the growing political tensions surrounding the confirmation process. Yet it noticeably avoided directly countering any of Crockett's detailed accusations. Several legal experts observed that the wording seemed intentionally designed to prevent any statements that might create legal complications later. The financial world reacted immediately. Shares of Atlantic Investment Group fell by nearly 30% within 48 hours of the hearing as investors began considering potential regulatory action and the threat of funds being tied to improper practices. 3 members of the company's board stepped down, saying the organization required new leadership to confront the seriousness of the allegations. A week after the hearing, with multiple investigations already underway, Crockett appeared on a national Sunday morning news show. The interviewer asked whether she had expected her questioning to spark such widespread consequences. "My only goal was to uncover the truth," she said. "From my experience as an attorney, I know that the strongest response to misconduct isn't loud language, it's careful preparation supported by proof. The documents in this case speak for themselves." By then, congressional oversight committees had opened broader inquiries into the management of consumer protection settlements across the country, examining whether the issues revealed in Florida were happening elsewhere. Early reports suggested that huge sums, possibly billions of dollars, had been diverted from their intended recipients through similar processes in several states. The situation soon affected national regulatory policy as well. 2 months after the hearing, lawmakers from both parties introduced a bill designed to improve transparency and accountability in the distribution of consumer protection settlements. The legislation, called the Settlement Integrity Act, required court approval for all settlement allocations, mandated public disclosure of organizations receiving the funds, and imposed a 5-year ban on officials accepting employment with entities that benefited from settlement decisions they influenced. The fallout for Bondi was significant. Law firms backed away from consulting contracts. Planned speaking events were canceled. Corporate boards she served on urged her to step down. As the inquiries expanded, her carefully built post-government career began to collapse under the pressure. 4 months after the hearing, the first criminal charges were issued, not against Bondi herself, but against 2 former senior officials at Enterprise Florida, who were accused of wire fraud and money laundering involving the misdirection of settlement funds. Their indictments mentioned public official A, described as the person who ordered the improper transfer while serving as state attorney general. The description unmistakably pointed to Bondi, implying she remained under investigation. For Crockett, the aftermath brought both recognition and new duties. She was selected to lead a special House subcommittee focused on consumer protection enforcement, where she applied the same methodical, evidence-driven strategy that had proven so successful during the hearing. Law schools invited her to speak about investigative oversight. Consumer groups credited her with revealing a system that had quietly redirected billions of dollars away from the people, who were supposed to receive compensation. What made this work wasn't political gamesmanship, she told an audience at Harvard Law School. It was treating oversight like a complex legal case, gather the documents, build the timeline, trace the flow of money, and present the facts plainly. She emphasized that real accountability becomes possible when the focus remains on verified evidence rather than political spectacle. Historians of law and politics began referring to the confrontation as a landmark moment in the oversight of consumer protection enforcement, a point when routine diversion of settlement funds was publicly exposed, leading to major reforms in how these massive financial penalties are managed. The true impact of the exchange was not only the documents Crockett revealed or the questions she asked, but the principle she articulated: you shifted $500 million intended for harmed consumers to organizations that later benefited you personally. That isn't an opinion, it's a documented fact. Her insistence that settlement money belongs to the victims, not to the officials distributing it, sparked a national conversation that continued to reshape the field and strengthened the belief that public service carries responsibilities that cannot be overshadowed by personal gain. A year later, the effects of that brief but powerful exchange were still influencing regulatory procedures and congressional oversight practices. The Settlement Integrity Act had passed with support from both parties and was actively changing how consumer funds were allocated. States adopted new transparency standards, launching public dashboards that allowed anyone to trace how every dollar of settlement money was spent. Consumer advocates noted that more funds were reaching actual victims than at any time in the previous 10 years. Professor William Morrison summarized the historic importance of the event in the Columbia Law Review. He argued that Crockett's questioning of Pam Bondi did more than halt a nomination. It exposed a nationwide failure in consumer protection enforcement that had quietly redirected billions of dollars from victims to well-connected insiders. By relying on documented proof rather than political messaging, a single congressional hearing achieved what years of traditional oversight had been unable to uncover. The confrontation demonstrated a lasting truth about American government: that the system functions most effectively when officials are held accountable through clear evidence and when the public interest outweighs personal benefit. If this discussion of government oversight and accountability resonates with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more detailed analyses of the key moments shaping modern American governance. Because the most effective defense against the misuse of power isn't anger, it's solid evidence presented with accuracy and purpose.